Good evening. I'm Dr. Alan Kadish, the president of Torah University, and I'm glad to welcome you to tonight's presentation, Hamas, Israel, and Gaza. Torah University has 19,000 students in 10 cities, one of which is Jerusalem, where we have several hundred students. So we're particularly interested in tonight's program. Torah is proud to be the home of the Forum of Life, Culture, and Society, run by Thane Rosenbaum. And I'm going to turn it over to Thane for what's a very interesting, timely, and important program about trying to understand what's going on in the Middle East and Israel today. Thane, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Kadish. Thank you, Dr. Kadish. My name is Thane Rosenbaum. I'm the creative director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society at Torah University, and welcome to our headline series tonight. Our program is All Eyes on Israel and Hamas. It's been 3 weeks since the stomach-turning scene of the massacre in southern Israel. Since then, we've had bombings and extended ground operations, incursions. There are all sorts of issues related to humanitarian aid and civilian casualties. And we have an extraordinary lineup of people to discuss it. First, we have Tal Heinrich. Tal, wave to the audience. Tal is the spokesperson for Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. You've seen her on cable networks for the last 3 weeks repeatedly. I was once her Middle East analyst when she had an anchored show on I-24. We have Einat Wilf. Einat, wave to everybody. There she is. Many of you may know Einat Wilf is a leading Israeli public intellectual and a former member of Israel's parliament. Judy Maltz, who is there you go, there's Judy, who is a senior correspondent for our Haaretz, who is now based in New York and who covers the issues around Israel and its connection to the global Jewry and relations with Israel. And lastly, Kobi Michael, the male on the panel. Kobi is a senior researcher with the Institute for National Security and Studies, which is a leading Israeli think tank on national security. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know it's late for some of you in Israel, so thank you for staying up with us. Let's just get straight to it. The mood of the Israeli people. We have a global audience here. Can we try to express what that mood is? Israelis are known for being very resilient, but this was a kind of blow unlike any other. And so how can we describe the people? Anyone want to start with that? Maybe you should start with
I think we'll start with the good news, because there's been so many, so many sites and stories that are very hard to process. But tonight we should start with the good news that there is a soldier, if you have heard, that the IDF has managed to release in ground operation. So I think we should start there, because the spirits has been just a teeny bit uplifted in the country, just to see her back safe, reunited with her family. I can't say actually a lot about the background which is brought to her release, but that is the teeny bit of hope that we can hold on to today. Zooming out, I think, Thane, just for the audience, I live in New York. I got called up to do this job and speak to the foreign media. And I got called up a bit, I think a few hours after what has transpired in the South. And I took the first El Al flight from New Jersey rather, and I landed, and ever since there, I've been here for almost 24 days, speaking to foreign media outlets, trying to explain the situation here on the ground. What really amazes me in the coverage that I usually sit down about 10 minutes, 5 minutes before the interview, so I listen in, and no matter what network, I think that there was one thing that all of them tend to forget or sort of underestimate. Everyone keeps covering it as if the October 7th massacre took place, and then Israel launched a counteroffensive in Gaza, and now the Gaza scene is taking place. The coverage is really lacking to highlight that Israeli cities are being bombarded constantly. And that is something that we usually really try to emphasize. We're talking about more than 8,150 rockets. Almost every day we had to run to shelters. Even sometimes during interviews, I have to take the earplug out, and then they realize that it's really happening, that there's an ongoing war, that also the home front, the Israeli home front, is also dealing with a lot, not only still digesting what happened on October 7th, but when I landed here, and just on a personal note, I told my boyfriend back home, who's still in New York, that I felt like I was trying to take in air and not enough oxygen was coming in right after it happened. Once the El Al flight landed, I finally inhaled and I felt like something's getting inside my lungs. I feel like I can describe to you that is also a feeling that many of my friends are feeling here, because once you try to do something, you feel like you're taking a certain action, and no matter, everyone wants to be active, everyone wants to do something to help the national effort. So many people that I know have maybe volunteered for military for reserve service, or are serving on the front lines right now, young people, and so there is a certain sense of unity, and everyone wants to do their part so they can inhale this oxygen, because we just stopped breathing for too many hours as a nation.
Einat, Kobi, many people wonder, is this for Israel worse than the Yom Kippur War? Certainly, Israel was in a very different position in 1973. It was also a surprise attack. It may have also been an intelligence failure. But now we think of Israel as a regional superpower. And yet this does, as we watch the news and hear people speak like Tal, this is a devastating blow. Are they comparable in any way? Anyone want to go first? Kobi? Einat? We're not hearing them?
I think Kobi is talking, but on
Yes,
mute.
I was on mute, sorry.
Okay.
I think that people around the world do not really understand the Israeli psyche at this moment. The comparison to Yom Kippur war is a wrong comparison. We have to understand that in Yom Kippur, although we were surprised, we fought, the IDF fought two well-occupied state armies supported by superpower of those days, the USSR. But the war was in the front. I mean, the Israeli home front was not in the war. This time we're talking about something that has not happened since the establishment of the State of Israel. And in this regard, I think that as far as I understand the Israeli psyche, the Israeli society feels that we are in chapter B of our war of independence, not less than that.
Wow.
And we are facing an existential threat, not because Hamas is an existential threat. Hamas is not an existential threat for Israel. But we understand that Hamas is a component, and unfortunately we found out on October 7th that a very essential and significant component of a much broader camp or axis, the resistance axis, which is led by Iran and supported by the Russians and China. Actually, Israel, from the first beginning of this war, we are facing a multi-front war. I mean, Israel is engaged already in 5 active fronts. I mean, from the most intensive one is, of course, the Gaza Strip, but we are in a war terror in the West Bank since March 22, and now it became to be much more intensive. And we are in the northern border vis-a-vis Hezbollah, in what we term now in Israel as something which is below the threshold of war, But believe me that in other days, and if we would not have been involved in the war in Gaza, we would have been in a full-scale war with Hezbollah, okay? Taking into consideration all the provocations and the escalation which is initiated by Hezbollah there. We are in war with South Syria. Just yesterday and the week before, barrage of rockets were launched from South Syria towards the Israeli Golan Heights. And we are with Yemen, where last week they launched 12 ballistic missiles of 2,000 kilometer range that were intercepted by the American Navy in the Red Sea.
Right.
And just 2 days ago, a drone with explosive that by mistake, instead of falling and exploded on Eilat, it exploded on a clinic in Taba, which is near Eilat. Okay.
Einat, I don't know if you want to add to that, but I have also an additional question that goes to something that Kobi said, which is that we got used to in 4 prior wars with Hamas that they would fire thousands of rockets. Most of them would land harmlessly. Iron Dome would take out many of them. There were no real Israeli casualties. Israel would then do whatever it needed to do to put a stop to it. Clearly, this time, when Kobi talks about we're engaged in a multilateral, it makes you think the planning, the organization, the intelligence, this could not just be Hamas, right? They just never had that capability before.
First of all, they built that capability, and we know that they built that capability. So we need to understand that, yes, they did that. They actually declared that they were going to do that. And just like the 9/11 Commission said that it was a failure of imagination, then yes, people in Israel failed to imagine that Hamas will actually carry out what they repeatedly said that they were going to carry out. And the reason that the sense of failure is so grand is because it really is not just about an intelligence failure or a tactical failure. It goes to the question of the job of a country. Like millennials like to say, you had one job. The country has one job before anything else to protect and defend the citizens living in its territory, in its sovereign territory, within its borders. And the failure and just the horrific failure, it's not just a general failure, it's, I mean, the barbarity and what was done and the fact that it is done on Israeli sovereign territory when Israel has one of the strongest militaries in the world, that is the question that people are asking. And it goes beyond a tactical question. And the reason also that it persists is that the government in general has been a massive failure since that. I mean, countries do suffer major blows, and people have been comparing it to 9/11, to Pearl Harbor, but they do not continue to be such a miserable failure after that. I mean, after Pearl Harbor, at least Roosevelt rose to the occasion and gave a rousing speech, and America went to war. I mean, we have a government that is continuing to be utterly dysfunctional. On the bright side, Israeli society is mobilizing to the point that Israelis are basically asking the government to just not intervene because we seem to be doing really well in the absence of a government. You know, during the whole judicial issue thing.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm saying, but there was just one headline that Netanyahu said, the country can do without 2 Air Force squadrons, but it cannot do without a government. And right now, people are saying this actually is reversed. We very much do need the 2 Air Force squadrons, but we actually are doing very well without our utterly dysfunctional government. So I think there's a sense that this is a whole house of cards that is collapsing. And when people are talking about Israel's second independence, it's not in terms of the threat, It's in terms of the sense that the country will have to be rebuilt.
So, Tal, I didn't ask you before. I'm not asking you to speak in an official capacity. So I don't know if you want to address that. I was going to ask both you and Judy to address this question of the word, barbarity that Einat just said. It's not as if Israel doesn't know Hamas, but did Hamas surprise Israelis with the level of grotesque savagery that was involved here? I know I'm still shocked every day. I think about 40 beheaded babies.
Well, Thane, I think during or after the last war, the last big war with Hamas, which was 9 years ago in the summer of 2014, the worst case scenario that most Israelis were thinking about at the time was that a bunch of Hamas terrorists would come through a tunnel and go up into some dining room of a kibbutz and just start shooting. That was the worst case scenario. Nobody could imagine that thousands of them would just basically walk through the fence, come in on the hang gliders, and take over, essentially conquer major parts of the Western Negev for a large part of the day, while Israelis were sitting, these kibbutzniks and people in Sderot and Ofakim in these development towns were sitting in their safe rooms, begging for help, calling up the TV anchor people because no one else would listen, whispering on the phone and asking them, send the army. Where is the army? Why is the army not coming? So again, like Einat said, there is, in many ways, it's so much worse than the Yom Kippur War because people no longer have faith, not only in the government, but also in the army. Where was the army during 10 hours? How long does it take? Now, we all know that most of the army is stationed in the West Bank, protecting the settlements and the settlers, okay? And that's why there was hardly anyone there that day. Most of them had been during Sukkot in the West Bank settlements, protecting members of the religious Zionism party who felt they needed to have a show of strength in the middle of the town of Hawara and set up a sukkah there. So there's no army, very little army down in on the Gaza border. So there's just such a sense of betrayal and lack of confidence in everything there.
Tal, do you want to respond to those last two?
Well, I'm obviously not in liberty to respond to anything political. So I speak on a different capacity. You know where I stand on, Israeli politics, American politics, everything, Middle East analysis, because you know me very well. I'll just say, I'll zoom out a little and try to describe maybe from a larger perspective, the ongoing debate that I witness here in the country, also as someone who just arrived again from the US and is absorbing the atmosphere from all different kind of, scenes, also from the Israeli media and various channels here. There is definitely a blame game going on. Many people, as everyone here described, are feeling discouraged, disheartened, betrayed even by certain institutions. And now the word conception is one word that keeps repeating, and we say it koncepcja in Hebrew, in every broadcast, in every discussion right now, and in every cafe, not that we're sitting in cafe, but in cafes, but in any kind of dinner table debate. Who held the right conception? Who led us astray, and who was right in every kind of level? If it's in politics, who was the one who said that Hamas must be dismantled 5 years ago or 10 years ago, that we must go in Gaza and not let them be, and that we can't live next to a terror enclave? And if it's the military, who were the former generals or high-ranked officials who called out and said that the military was not ready? So everyone is trying to point at the people who had it all wrong, the people who led others in a wrong direction, and the people who had it right. And we call it everyone is talking about the meltdown or the break of conceptions that we were holding before the October 7th massacre, and how our view, or each person's view, is going to change after the October 7th massacre. But it's just so for some people, what I see is that they are changing their opinions on certain issues, but for others, they are just they keep holding on to their pre October 7th conceptions, but that is the ongoing debate, just to describe the atmosphere again here.
Okay.
All right. And you're right. Every Israeli deserves to obviously get a 100% protection from the country, no matter where they're based. If it's Tel Aviv, if it's Judea and Samaria, if it's the south, if it's the north, it's the Golan Heights.
It actually matters to be protected in the sovereign territory of the state of Israel is the one job of the country. Long before, it actually matters if you live in Israeli sovereign territory. That's why the betrayal is so great. The sense that these were people living within Israel's recognized borders in actual sovereign territory, and that as a result of political priorities and various misconceptions, the citizens of the state of Israel living in its sovereign territory were betrayed and were left alone, and that actually matters. And we can't just say, oh, it doesn't matter where they are.
But why does it have to be either or? Can't all Israelis deserve protection?
Well, it turns out that the army isn't big enough to protect everywhere. When we had such large,
so that's a different kind of failure that we can discuss. But it can't be either or. Jewish people have to be protected wherever they are.
Who vote for Netanyahu and his allies? There wasn't enough army to protect the kibbutzim, and it is no coincidence that Netanyahu has refused since October 7th to even mutter the word kibbutzim, because the people in the kibbutzim do not vote for him.
Kobi, I want to ask, given what Einat just said about the sovereign land of Israel, we now know that in addition to the massacre, there's the kidnappings of people that lived in the sovereign portions of Israel. We know that there's a war aim here to eliminate Hamas. And I think many people are questioning, when they read the paper or watch the news, how can Israel achieve both the return of those hostages that once lived in the sovereign land of Israel, some of whom also have dual citizenships, and at the same time annihilate everyone and anyone who's responsible for October 7th? Is that something, I know that we're being told to strap ourselves in for something long, but we also know that there's some endless talk and condemnation about civilian casualties. How is this to be accomplished?
First of all, I would like to clarify something with regard to the strategic objective or the strategic aim of this war, because we heard that the political directive was to eliminate the military and the governmental capacities of Hamas. But I'm not sure that people really understand what is the meaning of eliminating the military capacities, okay? People might think that eliminating the military capacities means that we have to reach the last rocket or the last terrorist. No, we have to collapse the main centers of gravity of Hamas in order to paralyze the organization and prevent it from becoming again a military threat, okay? We have to hit the centers of gravity in a way that will not enable the organization to operate effectively from the military point of view. So this is something that people must understand, okay? We don't intend to occupy the Gaza Strip, and we don't intend to rule the daily life of the 2 million Palestinians there in the Gaza Strip. This is not the intention. And therefore, I think that it is a mission which is very doable, and it can be accomplished, and it must be accomplished. With regard to the hostages, I think that any sort of negotiation with Hamas is a mistake. I think that any sort of negotiation with Qatar or any sort of trial to provide Qatar with the privilege to be the princess of diplomacy of the Middle East, it's a huge mistake. I think that it is even immoral, okay? Because Qatar is the biggest provider and supporter of Hamas, and Qatar is not really interested in the hostages. Qatar is mainly interested in the survival of Hamas, because Qatar is, as I said, the biggest supporters not only of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, also of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and some other jihadi groups in the broader Middle East. Okay, Qatar is an enemy, and I think that at this era, at this time, we must have a moral clarity. Okay, there is no place for any sort of sophistication. Something like on the one hand and on the other hand. At this time, you are with us or against us. And I think that the United States of America could brought Qatar on its knees, okay, by putting an ultimatum on the table, telling to Qatar, you have 24 hours to throw out from the Qatarian soil all Hamas activists, to stop immediately or any kind of support of Hamas, and to shut down Al Jazeera, because Al Jazeera is the most dangerous, murderer inciting media platform in the world, okay? And if you are not going to do that, you are going to remain alone. And believe me that this teeny, funny country of less than 400 citizens and 1 million modern slaves wouldn't survive 2 hours. 2 hours, okay? And then Qatar would have done much more seriously with regard to the hostages. I think that we have to pressure Hamas, and we have to pressure the Gaza Strip as a whole, and to clarify to Hamas that holding the hostages is not a strategic asset for them, but on the contrary, strategic liable. And they have to free them unconditionally. Unconditionally, they have to free them. And then we have to continue with our military operation, and I'm sure that the Israeli strategists prepared and still preparing, and we saw it just yesterday night when they succeeded in rescuing one soldier, okay? Yeah. I'm sure that they are preparing a military operation in order to rescue hostages. But if we will not be able to pressure Hamas, to bring Hamas on its knees, and to eliminate the military capacities of Hamas, if we will not be able to introduce a crystal clear victory image here, we are going to pay a very high price in all the other fronts, and we are not going to remain alone, because all the free world will pay the same price.
Einat, I don't know if you want to respond to what Kobi said. I'm curious also, partly of what he said is about the role that the United States might play as a broker, in part, as Kobi says, and actually putting pressure on Qatar. But can you talk a little about your feelings about the response of the Biden administration thus far?
On the one hand, I mean, really throughout, both Biden personally has been remarkable. Again, as many Israelis said, we finally had a leader, someone who showed the empathy, the leadership. At one point, I even argued that we have the Americans at the top and Israeli society at the bottom, and in the middle, just a vast nothingness. But so he himself has been wonderful, and really kind of making it clear to Hezbollah and to others not to enter. On the other hand, where I do have criticism is in the effort to promote the idea that somehow Hamas does not enjoy the support of the vast majority of Palestinians. I think we're never going to really be able to get out of this mess if we continue to delude ourselves that Hamas somehow is separate from the Palestinian vision. We need to understand that the Hamas accurately represents and emerges from the Palestinian vision of from the river to the sea. That needs to be understood. I think as a result, it has been a mistake to pressure Israel to allow so much assistance to go into the Gaza Strip without putting pressure to release all the hostages. I think it should have been made clear that without the release of hostages, nothing goes into the Gaza Strip. And I think the United States pressured too early and took that lever away from Israel. And with hostages, as you know, time is of the essence. So I think it should have been made clear from the beginning. Nothing enters. Hamas has enough provisions. They're welcome to provide for their people. They are the government of Gaza. They launched this brutal attack. They hold the hostages. They should be held responsible. And I think in that respect, the American administration was too quick to pressure Israel to cave in.
Judy, I have a separate question for you, but before that, Tal, I know I've actually seen you on various cable networks responding to that very point. And I think that sometimes you look frustrated when you say things like, well, in the bombing of Dresden or the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we were not worried at that point about humanitarian corridors, nor was that true in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I'm just saying it's interesting. Here's something that you and Einat really agree on. Well,
usually, it depends which network you're talking to. Personally, I've never been in the UK, maybe for 2 hours, and I'm now discovering the British media, which is a whole new world for me. I have to say that was speaking to American networks from left to right. People are more prone to show support to Israel and really understand what's going on here. Way more familiar with the dynamics, I think. But maybe it's
can I just interrupt 1 second, just to be clear? So not everyone in our audience may realize that the BBC has, I think to this day, refused to refer to Hamas as terrorists. So that
right.
Right. Just at the
I think they changed their policy this week, Thane.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's still ongoing debates about that, but also Sky News is their coverage has been very, very hostile towards Israel from the very beginning. I'll say they knew what was coming. In the very first days of this war, we had to fight the cast doubters. Did it really happen? The atrocities were that brutal? Was it such a magnitude, such scope? So we had to provide evidence all the time. And then after a few days, nobody cared about the October 7th massacre. Okay, we heard about the atrocities. We don't want the full description. Now talk to me about what's going on in Gaza. Why aren't you giving them fuel? Where's the water? Where's the medical supplies? Why are you killing children? So now we all the time we again I find it very effective to resort to historical comparisons and so on. It's not working with every media outlet, but I'll just give you an example. When I was interviewed by Sky News, they asked me, how did they frame it? If you are it was 2 or 4 days ago, if you guys are announcing and calling on citizens of northern Gaza to evacuate to the south, but you are cutting off the communications in Gaza, how do you expect them to receive the message? And we've been saying so for 22 days. I can tell you that only 10% of northern Gaza residents are still there. Overwhelming majority of the residents of that area where the heavy fighting is taking place have evacuated to the southeast as Israel requested, and we have done so in many different channels, not just on social media and media channels. But again, we're not saying, we're not denying, and we're not confirming that we have been responsible for cutting off the communications. But what I said on air is that it is very legitimate to cut off the communications of your enemy that you were fighting during a war. And then when the anchor got pissed, I told him, otherwise, why would Alan Turing, spend so many hours trying to break the Enigma code? This is what you do during war. So he got pissed again.
Yeah, I remember that.
It's kind of and all the time they try to compare. Well, but there are more. When we say 1,400 Israelis were butchered, they say, well, but there are so many more Palestinians. And when we try to put them in place and talk to them about the numbers and accuracy, will you take reports coming out of North Korea at face value? they also try to, tell us, well, that's the Gaza Health Ministry, as if it's not controlled by Hamas, as if they are not the people with the guns, and so on. And then we also try to make the point that, in World War II, there were more German civilian casualties than British civilian casualties. Does it mean that Germany was the good guys and the UK were the bad
Right.
guys? So
Yeah.
it's
Judy-
yeah, it's not easy.
Judy, and hold on, Kobi, just let me get to Judy for a second. How, you write for Haaretz, which people who know the Israeli media scene think of as the far left, and very much a mouthpiece of the Peace Now movement, very much part of that community. What do Israelis think now, or what do you think that Americans should think when we hear the words about the death toll or civilian casualties in Gaza? And before that, you answer that, I do want to get back to, hopefully somebody will pick up on something that Einat said earlier that I think needs to be discussed further, which is people talk about Hamas being the oppressor of Gazans, but that's not true of all Gazans. Many Gazans support Hamas, and I think that that's something that is also not getting reflected in the coverage, as if this is a totalitarian regime. This is a regime that I honestly, I was surprised of how many Gazans left the north. I was shocked. I thought no one would leave. I thought no matter what Israel told them, they would stand there and stand next to people, the Hamas fighters. So anyway, let's start with civilian casualties, Judy.
Well, first you mentioned the fact that I'm from Haaretz and you called it a far left newspaper. I don't know what you mean by far left, anti-Zionist. So I will just say—
I didn't say anti-Zionist.
Okay, you said far left. So
Yeah.
just to clarify, Haaretz is a Zionist newspaper that believes in a two-state solution, and it always has been. That is our editorial policy. Not all our columnists adhere to that, but that is the official stand of the newspaper, okay?
Judy, I don't want to fight about this.
I know, I don't want to fight about it either, but
Gideon
when you say
Levy
far
couldn't
left,
get, he couldn't get a job in the United States.
Part of the establishment.
Gideon Levy, I'm sorry, no. Gideon Levy wouldn't get a job in the United States at anything. So there's nobody.
We have settlers who write weekly columns for
All right,
us.
okay.
Okay.
All right, so let's.
I have a suggestion. Try to parallel Haaretz into one of the American media outlets. What would it be?
We don't have anything like that.
New York Times. We like to call ourselves the New York Times of Israel, and I'm
Okay.
very, very
Which
happy
is-
with that.
Okay, it's not. Let's say it's a centrist.
So you're asking me, what does Haaretz think about?
No. I want to
California?
know what you think. I just want to know that we associate Haaretz with, among a certain United States, with a much more sympathetic view of the conflict. And so I would wonder, okay, well then how do they feel about the Gazan civilians given this ongoing incursion into Gaza?
Right. Okay. So I don't know how others feel about it. I assume that they feel very much as I do, that first of all, they are horrified about what happened in Israel. If you've been following the news, you also know that some of our reporters at the far left Haaretz were personally affected by this. A very close friend and dear colleague of mine, Amir Tibon, was stuck for 12 hours with his two little girls and his wife in their safe room until his father, the former General Noam Tibon, came down to rescue him because the army wasn't coming. We have reporters at our newspaper who have families from kibbutz near Oz and from other kibbutzim near there. So it's been so traumatic for our newspaper that I will reveal to you that the newspaper has offered actually psychological help for free to reporters who are both experiencing this personally and who have to go out and take testimonies from the survivors who've been through it. But what I will say is I have, as I told you, I've not been there during the whole time. I have been here though, and I have noticed something very unusual and different. Many people tend to believe, as you do, that we're this far left radical newspaper. And
didn't say
you know,
radical.
some of them, if I introduce myself as a reporter for Haaretz, they say, "Oh no, I don't want to talk to you. You're from Haaretz." These days in New York, when I go around and I say I'm from Haaretz, people are thrilled. They're dying to talk to an Israeli newspaper. They don't think of Haaretz like that anymore. So I don't know how to explain that, but something's changed.
Very interesting. How are we supposed to respond to what's going to continue to be, and Tal, certainly you're going to be tested in the oncoming weeks, the several things: global condemnation, the rioting in streets around Europe and even in the United States. I saw what we saw yesterday in Chicago. On college campuses, the kosher kitchen of Cornell was shut down last night for death threats against Jewish students. A dorm room at Drexel University was set on fire of a Jewish student. Columbia had a student that was assaulted. We're seeing more and more very much in your face. I like to look at it. I know this is a loaded thing to say, but the Arab street to some degree has come to America, and America's not used to it. Europeans understand the Arab street, but Americans are getting used to it this last week. And I'm wondering, is Israel just going to put their head down, plug their ears, and just move on, Gideon?
Yes, definitely. You know, the problem is that the international media, generally speaking, of course, there are some exceptions, okay, but it is so biased and so anti-Israeli and even anti-Semitic. There is a very heavy smell of anti-Semitism there. And the idea, and you referred to that before, the idea that nobody asks himself how it comes that such a murderer, brutal, barbaric terror organization has succeeded to flourish in the Gaza Strip, okay? And this takes us back to the idea of the psychological infrastructure that was nurtured for 3 decades under the umbrella of the Oslo process. By whom? First of all, by the Palestinian Authority, and here Einat with us, that wrote an entire book about it with Adi Schwartz. Later on, it was nurtured by Hamas and by UNRWA, okay, UN agency.
Yeah.
The idea of indoctrination for hatred and delegitimization and dehumanization of Israel and the Jews, and nurturing the ethos of armed resistance and the ethos of right of return, which is just the opposite side of the coin of the idea of not recognizing in the right of the state of Israel to exist as a nation state of the Jewish people in any borders, okay? And the problem is that the minds of 2 generations were poisoned. And this is the reason that such a murder, brutal, barbaric organization has succeeded to flourish there. And
One second, Kobi. Let me just interrupt you for 1 second. Most people in the audience don't remember. There was an audio tape of one of the Hamas fighters, terrorists, calling home and proudly telling his father that he killed Jews.
Yeah, yes, you are right. But you know, the main problem is that the international media and unfortunately even some Western leaders and intellectuals just refuse to listen carefully, not to what Kobi Michael says, okay, to what the Hamas leaders say, what Hamas leaders said in the past and what they say today. And they say loud and clear, okay, Israel is the first stage. We are going to demolish the state of Israel, and then we are going to reach Paris, Rome, Berlin, and New York. Their vision, okay, is to reestablish the Islamic Caliphate from Marrakesh to Bangladesh in the first phase. The second phase will be the entire world. And in their vision, there is no place in this Islamic Caliphate to the infidels who are the Jews and the Christians. And they have one option and only one: to convert to Islam or to be slaughtered. These are not my words. These are their words. and the intellectual in the West and the international media and some leaders just refuse to listen.
So
Just
wait,
listen
is
to
that
them.
is that
And-
anti-Semitism? Or
Yes,
is it
this
just
is anti-Semitism, and this is a sort of a a sort of a progressive approach, which is
Yeah.
based on the idea of anti-colonialism and all, and people slave themselves to political correctness, and you are not able to say anything about the culture of these Arab societies or of these movements, okay, or these people, because it is not politically correct to talk like that or to say things like that. And at the end of the day, they patronize these people. I do not patronize them. I don't
Take-
patronize them. I
take them at
respect
their
them.
word?
I
Not-
respect you. Just a moment. I respect them, you know, and due to the fact that I respect them, I believe to the things that they say. And if they say that they intend to slaughter me, I believe that they will slaughter me. And therefore, I will do all my best in order to prevent them from doing that. And they just showed on October 7th that they are serious with regard to their intentions.
Einat, what about this idea that Kobi said, the sort of the intellectual West, as if to say, and I think I understand what he's saying, it's not just the decolonization, but a certain perspective that will not morally judge people of color, or it's as if there is an unwillingness to call a barbarian, right? To be able to look at what the crime was and say, all right, that's the crime scene, and that just looks inhuman to me. Do you agree with what Kobi's saying? Because, the way he describes it, there's no cure for this. He's saying 2 generations have been poisoned. How can you unpoison that? What I was telling the audience about that young, Hamas terrorist calling home his father, gleeful, joyful, Father, I killed Jews. Aren't you proud of me? I killed Jews. To me, that's just one of the low points. That if that's what came across the border.
By the way, he didn't say I killed, he said I slaughtered.
I slaughtered.
Arabic. He said
And
I slaughtered.
And his father was very proud and told him, thank you for doing this for Allah. Anyway, Einat, do you have anyone to add to this?
Certainly. I mean, we're seeing 2 strands take place. For decades now, we've seen the intellectual preparation of the idea that Israel and Zionism are a unique incarnation of evil. And this was done through something that I called at the time the placard strategy, which is the equation of Israel and Zionism with all that is evil in the world. And it just changes according to whatever the evil of the moment is. So it used to be more colonialism and imperialism, and then apartheid and racism, and then white supremacy became the evil du jour. So that began to appear, and genocide, Nazism. So what we're seeing is a process that has been happening for decades now and is really the greatest legacy of the Soviet Union in the West. It started already in the Soviet Union as a kind of the respectable replacement for the protocols of the Elders of Zion. So it becomes the anti-Zionism as the respectable mass. And it has been inserted to the West, and we're now seeing it erupt. And if Israel and Zionism are indeed so evil, then anything that is done to them is justified. So that's what you're seeing. When you create that intellectual mindset, then it doesn't matter, because eradicating evil should be done by all means, and this includes it. So that's definitely what we're seeing, specifically with the Palestinians. Indeed, I see it also the main problem, but also the source of hope. We know that for decades, the Palestinians were not just let be. For decades, they were indulged by an entire system that allowed them to believe that they uniquely possess a right to undo a war. Unlike, as you know, refugees from war were being told, move on. Those are the new borders. Don't look back. Go build a new life. The
Einat, I'm sorry. There's a house in Poland that belonged to my father, and I've spent no time. My parents spent no time trying to get that and sitting in refugee camps. So I think that's what you're talking about to some degree, right?
Precisely.
Yep.
You and tens of millions of Hindus and Muslims and Ukrainians and Poles and Bulgarians. And I mean, everyone moved on, but the Palestinians were uniquely allowed to persist in the view that they can still basically roll back the clock, roll back time, and win the war of 1948, which they failed to win, which is a war that they waged so that Israel doesn't exist. So in the same way that for decades this structure was created and sustained, there's actually hope if we begin to take away this structure, which is why we cannot keep saying that Hamas does not represent the Palestinians, because if we keep saying that, and then we're going to kill 30,000 trained murderers of Hamas and we'll call it a day, then the next few years, a new organization will rise to liberate Palestine. I mean, Hamas are no different than the trained murderers of the 1972 Munich Olympic massacres and 1947, 48, 49 massacres and the Second Intifada massacres. I mean, as long as the idea of from the river to the sea is the governing ethos of all Palestinians, without almost any exceptions, there will always be a new generation of trained murderers ready to massacre in the name of liberating Palestine.
But Einat, if you listen to cable news, and again, we'll get back to Judy and Tal, you hear a lot of, well, the key thing here is to just kill all the Hamas terrorists and then hand the keys to the new country over to the Palestinian Authority, the people that control the West Bank, because they're the more peaceful
Who pay to slay.
Right, yeah, for people that actually do pay people. Most people don't know that's that there's a pay for slay program adopted in the West Bank, where depending upon who you kill, you actually get insurance benefits, monthly payments, stipends for you and your family, an incentivized system of killing Jews. So that question makes one think, is anyone really paying attention to what people are saying on the West Bank? Is it any really different? Could you actually tell President Abbas, go control the rest of it and everything will be fine? I think the real point is, are there any Palestinian partners for peace anywhere that Israel could rely on that believe in statesmanship and nation building? And by the way, Judy, I want to just come back to you for a second. You know, I've written a lot for Haaretz. That's what your first comeback should have been. I'm one of your authors, for God's sakes. I obviously don't have a problem with the place. What about this idea that, what is supposed to replace whatever it is that's achieved? What's supposed to happen? Tal, Judy, what do you think is going to happen?
First of all, I want to ask, Einat, because this assumption that you and many other Israelis have that Hamas represents all the Palestinians. I heard, I haven't seen it, that there was a poll done just about a week or two ago that shows that that's not true. It was done.
I'll explain.
Okay.
There's opposition to Hamas, substantial opposition on issues of corruption, management, the religion, all of these issues. There's no opposition to Hamas on massacring Jews. So a lot of people confuse the two. They see polls that say, oh, there's no support for that. I was very careful to say that Hamas represents the broadest Palestinian ethos of liberating Palestine from the river to the sea. And on that issue, I mean, the trained murderers...
Based on what? Based on what? Is there a poll that shows that?
Based on the fact, except for the fact that I studied, based on the fact that you actually do not have, I get this all the time. People say, oh, this is such a big generalization. Just like Israel has its extremists, the Palestinians have their extremists, there must be different voices. And my answer is always the same. I have just made such a broad statement that I've made it very easy to take me down. All you need to do is bring Palestinian voices, NGOs, op-ed writers, who don't tell me that they seek peace, who say that they recognize that the Jewish people as a people, have the equal right to self-determination in their ancient homeland, that they understand that this means that they do not possess a right of return into the state of Israel. I'm being very specific because I've learned by now not to listen to generalities. And I always tell them, prove me wrong. Go bring me Palestinians who say that clearly in their voice and precisely. I collect, by now I have 1 or 2 people on Twitter who say that. And the day that we will begin to have substantial numbers of Palestinians who openly and clearly say, it's time to recognize the equal right of the Jewish people to self-determination. We are not refugees. There's no right of return. When we hear that clearly, that's the day we can finally make peace.
So not everyone knows that when Israel withdrew from Gaza, it's important, not everyone realizes that not a single Jew has lived in Gaza since 2005, and nothing has prevented the Gazans from turning Gaza into Singapore or Macau. The only thing that is in their way is that they don't want Jewish neighbors, and that's their first order of business. But what people don't realize is that there was a democratic election, that Gaza defeated Fatah and then kicked Fatah out, and they went to the West Bank. The question I'd ask all 4 of you is, if the Gazans had then, the leaders of Hamas had then run across the border and somehow found their way into the West Bank and ran an election against Fatah in the West Bank, would they have won there?
100%.
Yes.
They don't have to run, they're already there.
We just have to follow the polls of Khalil Shkaki and to find out what would be the results if elections would have been held in the Palestinian territories. I mean, Ismail Haniyeh versus Abu Mazen, it's 58% versus 32%. Okay, and to the parliamentarian election, it is almost equal, and there are some minor changes. Sometimes Hamas is 35% and Fatah 37%, and sometimes the vice versa. Okay. But there is no doubt that Hamas is a very popular movement, not only in the Gaza Strip, in the West
And
Bank.
they don't have to run there. They
But
don't
there
have
is
to
no-
run their thing. They're already there on the
Right.
ground. You have
Yes.
Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad people in the West Bank. Otherwise, Israel
Yes,
just
yes,
arrested
but
a few
fortunately-
hundreds of them over the last days.
But fortunately, the major difference between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank is that we are present there in the West Bank, and we have the full freedom of action, and therefore we can enter Jenin and Nablus and Ramallah and Hebron in order to deal with these terrorists and to mow the grass. This was not the situation in the Gaza Strip, but this is going to be the situation in the Gaza Strip in the day
Used to
after
be
the
the
war,
situation.
because Israel will not return to the days before the war, and Israel will demand to have the full freedom of action in the Gaza Strip in order to prevent Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad from recovering themselves. But let me tell you just something with regard to the things that have been said here by Einat, that I fully agree with her. Okay. The main problem that we have with all the polls and all the questions that we see there is that the questions are very general and they are not clarified, because when you ask people if you are against or in favor of a two-state solution, all of those who say that, or most of those who say that they are, among the Palestinians, I mean, that they are in favor of a two-state solution, when it comes to the clarifying question, what do we mean, or what do you mean by two-state solution, then we find that there is no two-state solution, because in their eyes or in their mind, two-state solution means the right of return to the Palestinians. Okay, it means no recognition, as Einat said, with regard to the self-determination of the Jewish people. It means that there is no any Jewish affiliation to Jerusalem, okay, and there is no any right for the Jews to be in Jerusalem, and there was no Temple Mount, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, there is a huge gap between the idea of supporting the general slogan of a two-state solution and the details of what is the meaning of two-state solution.
So-
at the end of the day, there is no such support among the Palestinian constituency, generally speaking.
So that's very depressing, Kobi, because it makes one think, well, that means that there's really not much of a difference between the mindset of a Hamas soldier, enemy combatant, and an ordinary run-of-the-mill Palestinian that is just, trying to live their lives. When it comes to their
Absolutely, at least in my mind, the Palestinian
So what is your
Authority.
solution? Are you
Palestinian-
saying, okay,
first of
since
all,
they all
no,
support Hamas, they all
I will tell you
support
something, Judy. I will tell you something about the term of solution. The term of solution,
Mhm.
okay?
You want a
is
two-state
is
solution,
totally
they're seeking a
irrelevant-
final
is
solution.
a totally
So what are you
irrelevant.
saying? Kill them all? Is that what you're saying?
No,
The
this
solution
is
is
not
let's
what
just
I'm
kill
saying.
them
First
all?
of all,
I don't
I do-
understand.
Can
so
I say
let me
something
try
about
to
it? Can I say
explain.
this? The lack
Okay?
of
Let me
imagination that we've
Let
had.
me try to explain. I do not believe, okay, that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be resolved in the near future, okay? We can improve the situation, okay? We can do some further steps, and we can make some maybe interim agreements that will improve the life of the Palestinians and the Israelis, and maybe will lay the conditions for the next generation to complete the journey towards a final status agreement. Now, there is no even a slight chance, okay, to reach to a final status agreement, and this must be clear. Now, with regard to the Palestinian Authority, from day one, was established as a failed semi-state entity, corrupted, dysfunctional, and actually the historical, I would say, failure of the Palestinian leadership with the kafia and with the suit, okay, Arafat and his successor Abu Mazen, is that they didn't succeed to make the transitional process from a revolutionary national movement to state builders. Actually, the Palestinian leadership was never interested in building an independent Palestinian state. The only Palestinian figure that was really interested in, and he was known as the Palestinian Ben Gurion, was Salam Fayyad.
Yeah.
Salam Fayyad is not from the Fatah, and Salam Fayyad did some things that are very impressive in this regard. He had two versions of the establishment of the independent Palestinian state, but he was thrown by whom? By the old guard of the Fatah. And why? Because he fought against the corruption, because he fought against nepotism, because he wanted to do reforms, and he really wanted to build a Palestinian state. They are not interested in building a Palestinian state. It must be clear, okay?
Exactly.
They are interested in different things, and therefore the Palestinian Authority should be deconstructed and reconstructed. If
So-
we want the
Just like our government, right?
So Einat, you had
There's
something you were
no
going to say a moment ago.
equivalency.
Yes, because I want to.
But just one sentence
Our government is
accomplish
completely
the claim,
dysfunctional
okay?
right now, yeah.
The Palestinian Authority, till these days, till today, till this hour, okay, is part of the event that we saw in October 7. They have responsibility for this event as well. Just last Thursday,
Wait, hold on,
In order
Kobi, no one is saying that.
I'm saying that.
I know. I just want to know.
Based-
are you the-
Okay, and I
on
will
what
tell
are
you,
you
and I
saying
will tell
that?
you why. First of all, people do not distinguish or differentiate between the idea that Abu Mazen is against the idea of using terror, okay, because he understands that strategically it doesn't work in favor of the Palestinians, not from the moral point of view, because he believes that Jews should not be killed. No, because he thinks that strategically it will be wrong. But in the very same
Wait,
time,
hold on a second.
he's
That's
the
one
biggest.
of the reasons why he denied to Donald Trump that there was a pay for slave program, right? That's
Okay,
the reason.
but
That's
in
the
the very same time, He supports terrorism because he pays money for the terrorists in the Israeli prisons and to their families. He glorifies each terrorist that was killed by Israel is a martyr, a shaheed.
And he said that he would never give up the martyr program.
Yes, and 2 days after a terrorist was killed, there is a school on his name, okay, or a public building on his name. And just last Thursday, okay, the religious ministry, which is under Abu Mazen, okay, Abu Mazen is the president. They issued each Thursday, they issue a document for the imams in the mosques, what to tell to the people in the prayer of a Friday in the mosques. And last Thursday, they wrote in an official document of the Palestinian Authority that the most important thing is, first of all, the idea of the bombarding of Al Ahli hospital in the Gaza Strip by the Israelis, and we have to revenge, okay, the blood that was spilled by the Israelis. Although this is 3 days after all the world
we all know
this is not Israel, and they continue blaming Israel, fighting against Israel, and then they
continue to blame Jews for the Holocaust.
To talk in the mosques about the Islamic hadith that says, "Ho, ya Muslim, talk to each tree and stone that the Jew is behind." Okay. So this is Abu Mazen. This is the Palestinian Authority.
Okay. So
this is the partner that we want.
Okay.
So you're saying, going back to where we were on October 6th, we'll just manage the conflict. Where's that going to get us?
No, it's not what he's saying. Nobody's saying
manage. We've got to manage.
We're just saying.
First of all,
I'll say one thing, and I have to jump out. I'll just say it because I have to jump out. I think that we are trying to talk about, again, I'm going back to historical examples. It's like talking about a Marshall Plan in like 1940. We're not there. We're definitely not there yet. First, we have to win very decisively and deal a very major blow to terrorism. Palestinians and terrorists around the world must understand that terrorism is simply a dead end. It's a dead end. It's not an option. So just like, the Allies dealt with pure evil if it was, imperialist Japan or I'm not talking about this kind of major blow, but just understand the idea behind it, or Nazi Germany, it has to be so major that people have to understand that resorting to terrorism and choosing this ideology is going to end up very, very, very bad for them. And changing the reality in Gaza for a few decades. Only after this has been achieved, we can talk about all other contingencies. But first, a major victory on the ground is needed, and a humiliation. That's what the Arab world understands.
Yeah, and in fact, part of their celebration on the 7th and 8th was the very opposite, their jubilation of the success.
You have to humiliate the terrorists.
Yeah. Right.
That's how I see it.
Tal, I think you want to take off, or can you?
Yes, I have to go.
Okay, Tal, thank you. We're going to stick around for a few more minutes.
Sure.
Tal, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Thank you. Einat, there was something you wanted to say a while back ago, and then I want to go back to Judy. I have 2 questions for her, but why don't you respond to what you wanted to say a while back ago?
I want to chart a path between what Judy and Nira is saying, that to understand that from the river to the sea is the most fundamental Palestinian ethos. That it is what it means to be a Palestinian, I think is important for us to have as a shared understanding as Israelis. We need to understand what we're up against. The fact that this is what Palestinians want, that this has been the Palestinian vision essentially for the last century. No Jewish state and any borders, which is why they consistently reject any kind of agreement, solution that will allow a Jewish state to stand in any borders. It's important for us to understand it. Our leaders, when we had supposedly the left, Mapai, the Israeli Labor Party, Ben-Gurion, they knew what they were up against. They were under no illusions as to what the the Palestinians were after. So I think we would be served much better as a country if we had that shared understanding. What I think is weird is somehow people think that, oh, to say that Hamas represents the Palestinian ethos of liberate Palestine from the river to the sea means we need to kill them all. No. What the Allies did with Nazi Germany, with Japan, is yes, they achieved victory, they defeated them militarily, but ultimately what they understood is for there to be peace, is that those people will have to be reprogrammed. I'm currently delving deeper into the story of Japan. I'm reading a book called Embracing Defeat. It's remarkable the radical plan that the American occupation had for creating a completely different Japanese society, to the point that today we think of Japan as sushi and Pikachu rather than the atrocities that they committed in China and Korea. And we don't even remember that anymore. And even in Nazi Germany, you had some opposition at the end to Hitler. In Japan, at the end, it was described as a complete society mobilized for death. In that, it's much more akin to the Palestinians, where you do not have oppositional voices to the idea of liberating Palestine from the river to the sea. We need to understand that the path to peace is to have a Palestinian people who reconceptualize what it means to be a Palestinian, who develop a positive vision of establishing a state next to the Jewish state rather than instead of it. This will require drawing up the entire web of support that sustains the From the River to the Sea. I just tweeted yesterday that the day that From the River to the Sea will have the same social standing as Heil Hitler, that's when we move towards peace. When we understand that this idea is so toxic that the idea has to be illegitimate, and then the people can have a different vision. The problem is not with the people, the problem is with the ideology that they all share.
Judy, I want to get back to something that Einat started us off with, and then you picked up too, which is the sort of the failure of this government. And one of the things that I know, when eventually the report of the intelligence failure is finally written, somebody is going to raise this point. I assume they're going to say it didn't help that the entire country left of center was protesting every weekend against Netanyahu. And that, when I, as in my many years as a law professor, when I tell people that Israel doesn't have a constitution and that they don't even have what we know as the First Amendment for freedom of speech, they have basic laws, but they always thought they'd get around to writing a constitution, but they never got around to writing a constitution. People look at me like, what do you mean? I say, well, they were busy. They're busy fighting wars. Other things are going on. For whatever reason, they never wrote a constitution that established boundaries between the different systems of government, that set up rules for the judiciary. So they find themselves in this position of having this sort of, strange little rules that apply to Supreme Court justices that wouldn't apply to any other Supreme Court justices in the world. And so their idea of a judicial overhaul. I'm wondering whether someone is going to eventually say, if they haven't already, we're not that kind of country that has the luxury of going to Tel Aviv in the thousands every weekend and protesting the government.
Yeah.
What? Tens of thousands. Hundreds of, right,
even
exactly. Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
That distracted us in a way that contributed to this intelligence blunder.
Well, that's exactly what Netanyahu and his mouthpieces are saying now. They're blaming everyone but themselves.
Right.
And the first people they're blaming the protest movement. But look, Netanyahu was told, he was warned. I mean, you remember, his defense minister tried to warn him that this was not a good plan, that it was splitting apart the country, and that Israel's enemies were watching, and they were very gleeful about what was happening. And what did Netanyahu do? He fired him. Okay, he later reinstated him. He did not have time to meet with the chief of staff, who also wanted to warn him. What did they want? All they wanted is for him to say, okay, we won't go ahead with this new law that eliminates the reasonableness doctrine. Let's just do that, and the country will start a process of healing. This is so dangerous what's going on, and he would not listen to them. So that's what I say to you in response. It's all his fault. It's all his fault. The writing was on the wall. You can look at newspapers, at the headlines of newspapers from just a few months ago, with warnings that Israel's enemies were watching and waiting for the right moment because they could see what was going on. And he did nothing to prevent it. Not only did he do nothing to prevent it, he encouraged it, because divide and rule is what he does in Israel and what he's done among the Palestinians. And that's why he also propped up Hamas all these years.
All right, let me just take two questions from the audience and I'll say goodnight to you. This was just a really awesome, incredibly stimulating and eventful night. So thank you all. But before, let's take some questions from the audience. This comes from a Julie Abraham. Why is Qatar so invested in these terrorist groups? Can you explain this connection and motivation to the audience? Anyone want to take that? Kobi?
Yes, this is, I would say, a very well-developed and sophisticated hedging strategy of a very small and fragile and vulnerable country. And they just issued for themselves an insurance policy by supporting any kind of potential enemy. Okay, and they just bought their enemies with money, and they made it just as their strategy or ideology. And at the end of the day, we saw that they supported Jabhat al-Nusra, okay, in Syria, and they support Hamas, and they support the Muslim Brotherhood, and they support and operate Al Jazeera, that ignites all the Arab world, and it is one of the generators of the so-called Arab Spring or the Arab upheaval. And at the end of the day, they became to be in such a prestigious position because they had succeeded to both the West as well by buying football teams and by building universities and founding universities. And at the end of the day, with their money, they created and they built influence. And at the end of the day, they became to be the princess of diplomacy here in the region.
All right. Last question, actually. This is specifically for you, Judy. It comes from Richard Klein, who says, Judy never got a chance to answer whether the Peace Now people see this current crisis in a way that's different from most other Israelis.
Look, I haven't spoken to the Peace Now people. I have seen some of the statements that they've put out. I think what they are saying, I don't represent them. I'll just say what I've seen they've said is that this just proves to them how important it is to have two states. Whether it's possible right now, I don't know. I'm sure they would agree with most of us that it's not a possibility, but eventually that is really the only solution.
Okay. Before we say goodnight, we have a few closing remarks, but stay with us for a second. Isaiah, can you pull some of that up, please? Let's see. Well, it's not there yet, but I do want to say in closing with all of you, this was an extraordinary, first of all, forgot to welcome the people. Lots of people watched us live on Facebook and YouTube tonight. So thank you for showing up on YouTube, and don't forget, go to folks.org and sign up for future events. And so thank you for that. As stimulating as this was, it was very despairing. The news is just really not good. And I just think that most people that are paying any attention should prepare themselves that the news could get worse. Again, I hope I'm wrong. I don't know if any of you disagree with me, but in listening for the last hour and a half, 15 minutes, I feel more pessimistic and skeptical about where we are than certainly October 6th.
You can be more optimistic if Israel will be able to accomplish successfully its mission in the Gaza Strip with regard to Hamas, And if the free world will be sober enough in order to understand that this is not only the war of Israel against Hamas, but this is the war of the free world, the civilized world against the violent and barbaric darkness.
Yeah, but you and Einat don't think that the world wants to see that they refuse.
And this is the reason that America has to play a very significant role in this regard. And I'm very happy about its presence here and about the determination of the American administration, mainly the American president. And I think that they do understand exactly the situation, and they understand that we are talking about a regional war that will project immediately, negatively or positively, okay, on the other war zones, be it Ukraine or Southern Chinese Sea, because we are talking here not about Israel and Hamas, we are talking here about the resistance axis, which is led by Iran, supported by China and Russia.
The point that you made earlier, Kobi, I don't want to just completely connect the dots for you, but I thought the point you made much earlier was, don't fool yourself, America, if you think you're supporting Israel simply because they're an ally and they're a democracy. You're supporting Israel because the enemies of Israel are coming after you too.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think
Einat, do you have something you want to add and close the night?
Absolutely. First of all, I'm not going to pretend that I'm not oscillating between moments of despair and moments of resolve. I think it's been a very difficult time for all of us. But at least in my moments of resolve, I want to say I consider myself a long-term optimist. As I said, we have numerous examples in history of things that were unthinkable and then became possible. So I do believe that this is possible. I consider myself a long-term optimist and a long-term infrastructure-based peace activist. But I think if we ever want to have a positive future, we just need to know what we're up against. We're never going to build something right if we're going to analyze the situation incorrectly. And of course, the greatest source of optimism these days is the mobilization of Israeli society. It's to really see that we have the making of creating Israel once more better, stronger. I think this is something that everyone who comes to Israel sees now. So it's for the long term. It's not going to happen without a lot of work, but it can be done.
And Thane, you were asking me before about the protest movement. All I can say is thank God for that protest movement, because if we hadn't had that protest movement, we would not have this civil mobilization that we have today.
Great point.
I mean, because we have a completely dysfunctional government, nothing is working. And thanks to all these protesters who had built this amazing infrastructure over the course of 9 months, we have people who were evacuated and displaced from the kibbutzim down south and from up north. They are getting relief, they are getting therapists, they are getting food, as well as the army itself. So,
Judy, that part of the story is not getting out.
what?
That part is certainly not here. But I'm glad that you
Actually, the New York Times had a story today about Brothers in Arms. I saw. I think it was today or yesterday. They had about the brothers.
It's a big story.
What's that? Not?
I'm saying it should get out. It's the biggest story within it.
Yeah.
No,
It's an amazing story.
It's a great story, and I'm glad you shared that with us. All right, everyone. Thank you for your time, for your wisdom. I'm worried about you if you're in Israel, and let's look forward to better days. I'm Thane Rosenbaum for FOLCS. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good
Good
night.
night. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks.